Welcome to the big interview. My name is Charles Benoni Okai. I'm the acting editor of the Graphic Business. Today, we have in our midst the former Minister of Education, a former Minister of Communications, and a former Minister of Trade and Industry in Ghana. It is no mean a person, but our own Dr. Ekwow Spio Garbrah. Doc, you're welcome to Graphic.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We haven't heard about you, very actively as you used to be in the past. Can you explain why?
I'm currently playing a very significant role on the Pan-African continental basis with a UK-based global company called Ekwow Capacity Exchange. That's I think an announcement in the Daily Graphic several months ago, possibly in September, October, about that particular appointment as the president for the African region of that organization and also the managing director globally. And of course, that has obviously taken a lot of my time and attention and focus because basically the company Ekwow Capex is introducing into the global economy a new digital currency called the ECO, which will help to facilitate trade and investment, especially for the African region. That is the region I'm responsible for. Because what they're trying to do is basically to capture about $5 trillion of world trade, which is about 20 to 25% of all global trade, which currently takes place but without any cash. So there are countries and companies that are trading globally through the exchange value. So Zambia's copper is exchanged for a bridge or a stadium from China usually. Or Brazilian tea or coffee is exchanged for Norwegian butter. African countries are among the ones that often don't have the cash to pay supplies from IBM or supplies from Hewlett Packard or whatever it is. And these multinational companies, when they come into Africa, they get locked up, their cash gets locked up in inventories that are not moving because of cash. And so they are very interested in liquidity. And this company that I'm happy to represent at this time has this particular product and service. And that is what is keeping me a little bit outside the public eye.
Oh, okay. I know you, from your background from the African Development Bank, where you served, I can imagine your knowledge in this area. But has that taken you away from the political scene in Ghana?
Well,
so if I may ask, what do you think about
it? It does take me away in the sense that I don't focus on it in my day-to-day activities. My mind has to work with my clients and my organization in terms of their business plan and the countries in Africa that they want us to operate in. So, of course, I listen to the news, I monitor a number of developments, I'm on various WhatsApp platforms, I see what is going on, but I'm not really commenting on them at this time.
I can imagine, but at least you also know about what happens in Parliament. You did a piece on that.
Oh,
can you share a bit of what you think is happening and how it can get better?
Well, I'm trying to identify this article that I wrote in the Daily Graphic, I think it was in early January, when it became obvious that we're having, for lack of a better word, a bifurcated parliament, a two-sided parliament of 137, which we have all grown to see. And I could forecast that if we didn't take certain measures as a country, as a people, that we will end up in strange relationships and strange developments. And I wasn't trying to be a prophet of any kind, but I think the evidence that we've experienced over the last 1 year shows that things could have been managed a lot better. Of course, we have a parliament that has the minority personality as a speaker of the parliament, and which with the 137, there's no obvious majority, even though they have defined their own majority and minority in their own ways, but in terms of voting capacity. So you found the situations which I don't think was intended, where a person can be in the chair as a speaker or as an acting speaker, and when it comes to voting, then they can resign or at least temporarily cede the chair to another personality who then comes to sit in the chair so this first person can vote. I don't think that was ever contemplated at the time our constitution was being written. So that's just one of the quirks of what is happening. And so I'm depersonalizing it so that we don't deal with personalities, but we deal with the issues. And the issue at hand is that this kind of turbulence, which we saw already in the first year, if we don't take active decisions and actions to cure it, and we allow it to metamorphose and even move into the second term of this second year of this government, I can't forecast and foresee what the final outcome would be, but I can tell that it will not be too pleasant.
Can be the solution?
Well, no, talking. People should talk. The people who have the power, unfortunately, are the ones who must give way to others who are powerless. And this is even more dangerous if it happens, as we are now finding out, when, from a financial management point of view, whoever's fault it is, the economy apparently is not being as well managed as it could be. Otherwise, you wouldn't be seeing stories about Fitch. We used to work with Fitch, the African Development Bank, and in the International Finance Corporation, where I worked, IFC, World Bank. And when Fitch downgrades a country, it sends a signal to investors that either don't bring your money into the country, or if you're bringing your money, then charge a higher interest rate. It's expensive to have a downgrade, no matter what anybody says. So those are signals. And before that, there were articles in Bloomberg, there were articles in New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times. So as a media and communications professional who at one time had to look out for the well-being and the name and brand reputation of the whole World Bank Group, but working through the International Finance Corporation. And then secondly, to think about the brand, reputation, and image of the African Development Bank Group. At that point in time, I was the head of the whole African Development Bank at the very ripe age of, I think, 35 or something, 36. And so globally, you are looking at all kinds of things which affect the image of Africa, image of the bank, image of the office president, etc. And you are continually managing this image process. And so part of what I'm going to be speaking about today is about image management, reputation management. And when people find, because of this bifurcation in Parliament of Ghana, that it ends up in fisticuffs, fights. And I'm not sure whether Ghana has ever had what you call blows or struggle, physical struggle in its parliament before. So the impact of that, those images alone on the country's reputation, I mean, you have to do a whole lot of research to really come out with it in a granular manner that people will appreciate and agree and understand. Otherwise, it looks like it's a partisan, this and that. I'm talking technically. I'm trying to be very, very technical in this conversation about image management, about brand management, about brand equity. The country's brand equity would have suffered. Any country's brand equity. Today is Ghana, but it could have been Zimbabwe, it could have been, Poland. There have been other fights in other parliaments around the world. And I'm sure when we saw those fights as Ghanaians, we said, what's going on here? I mean, everybody would have asked themselves about the fight in another country. Strange questions. So when that fight is in your country, and other people are also watching it, what's happening to this country? Oh, this is the country in which we have a mining project. Oh, this is the country in which we have a poultry farm. This is the country in which we have a cement plant. Hey, what's happening? Look, directors of investment, directors of finance start calling, each other. Then they call their finance, the stockbrokers, those who are managing their investments. Hey, look, is my investment safe? Should I still be in Ghana? And my bonds, how are they doing? The Bank of Ghana will start worrying. I mean, so if you've been in the positions that I have been, in the Commonwealth, for the whole Commonwealth of Nations, at the World Bank, at the African Development Bank, in government, you can see all this playing just by being in your bedroom. See, so you ask me, how am I feeling? How am I noticing these things? I don't have to go anywhere to know what is going on. Just by hearing some news and interpreting it and imagining myself sitting at the Ministry of Mines and Energy. That's another ministry I served in. And people wondering what is happening with their mining investments and their oil and gas investments. That is happening right now, real time. But we don't see it.
Having talked about Parliament and what is happening, I think one of the main burning points now has to do with this E-Levy thing.
So, my view on the E-Levy, as I said, is to try and look at it circumferentially, look at as many angles to it as possible. There's obviously the financial angle. The government needs tax revenues. So that's one angle. So that's taxation. The other aspect is that the tax is on the telecommunications sector. And so we talk it Electronic Levy. Telecommunications brings me to one of my previous portfolios, which is communication. And in fact, the fact that I subsequently moved on to a global level in communications, being the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization. So it's a subject that I have some interest and familiarity with. Then it also reminds me of Ghana's own history, which is when in 1995, President Rawlings then, and the government of the time decided to, some people say impose, some people say enact a new law, a value-added tax law. So that was introduction of a new tax policy and a new tax regime into Ghana. And the interesting facts are that the current president, who was then in opposition, led some demonstrations in Ghana. There were 3 of them that also got famously branded. Kumi Preko, CME Preko. And the effects, I think, are what I want to talk about, not necessarily the demonstrations themselves. But the effect was that the president at the time, President Rawlings, seeing what was going on, decided to suspend the whole VAT process. So in 1995, May 1995, when the demonstration took place, I was ambassador to the United States, but I read that the VAT had been suspended. When I became Minister of Communication in 1997, he told me, the first thing he told me was that in that ministry, what he wanted me to do was to educate the public, the Ghanaian public, for them to understand why the value-added tax was actually a good tax proposal and not the negative ideas that were being propagated by those who opposed it. So that became my first goal, amongst many goals within the Ministry of Communication. And after studying the problem from a professional point of view, that's what I'm saying, I want our discussion to be as technical and as professional as possible, because the natural tendency for some people, either seeing my face, hearing my voice, is to assume that it is coming from a certain angle. And I hope that my nationality, my patriotism, and my nationalism will show through than any partisanship. And that's why I'm recounting what another president did, given the same, similar, but not the same, similar conditions. So I had to study it from a technical point of view and to see what had taken place. And I did that by creating a committee of professionals, pure professional, communication professionals. There are about 20 of them in the Ministry of Communication. My then deputy, who became the flag bearer of NDC, and President of Ghana, President John Mahama, was then in the ministry. He was my deputy for that particular committee. And we went to a process of analyzing the issues, understanding the pros and the cons of the value-added tax as a tax regime, analyzing the stakeholders. You do a stakeholder mapping. You map your stakeholders, the groups in favor and the groups who were against, and what they were saying at the time that the policy was being implemented and when it was suspended. You then move to the next stage in your diagnostic assessment. This is diagnosis, like doctors do every day. I've got a disease on my hand, how do I handle it? You talk to other doctors and get opinions from them. So you also, in this case, go to the field and test some of the stakeholder opinion. For example, you talk to Ghana Union of Traders Associations and find out what their position was then and what it is now. Because they're trying to bring the VAT back. Now this is the position, the government wants to bring the VAT back. How do we bring it back? So what about, the financial institutions, banks? What do you think about the VAT before and after? What should we do about it to let it work this time? You talk to the same political parties as well, their stakeholders, and you go down the whole gamut of stakeholders and talk to them and get all the way down to market women, traders, everybody who is likely to pay that VAT. He's a stakeholder in the VAT. You talk to your international community stakeholders, your World Banks, your IMFs, and other business people, investors, and all that. Then you get a very clear picture of those who are likely to support it if it came back, those who may still oppose it if it came back, those who need to be persuaded about one thing or the other because they didn't understand it really properly. So, but at least you understood the challenges for that particular tax regime.
Yeah.
And then we then have to put in place public education strategy and action plans to go from community to community, sector by sector, based on the stakeholder mapping, to start changing opinions. So it took 18 months. One of the most interesting and critical issues in communication, especially public communication, is the fact that people underestimate, almost always, governments, actually even in a cabinet meeting, non-communication professionals will just assume that, oh, let's have a press conference on this matter and let's share some material to a journalist, and I think they will understand and we can just pass the bill. It won't happen that way. And I can see that also happening now, where the ruling government, I think, probably based on whatever information they have, believe that the bill can be passed. I'm sure it can be passed if it's a matter of numbers and if it's a matter of just pushing your way through. But whether when you are passing the bill and you want people to cooperate with you, okay, so now I heard one of the ministers say that about 24% of Ghanaians, according to a certain research they've done, may not cooperate, at least initially, and may withhold the payments by transferring Momo, moving to cash and checks rather than Momo, for example. So I guess the government itself is doing some research on that subject.
You look at what has started and then what you explained you did with the VAT at the time.
Yes.
Do you think government should suspend it and finish with the town hall meetings before they reintroduce it?
If the NDC government at the time, Rawlings government, even though it also wanted tax revenue, but for the sake of the peace of Ghana and the tranquility of Ghana, because there were demonstrations and people had died and all of that, was willing to suspend that tax regime because quite clearly people didn't understand it. And just this morning, I consciously listened to one deputy minister on GTV for almost an hour and a half. And the questions that were coming, it was obvious that Ghanaians, or at least those who listened to a particular program, had not sufficiently understood it.
Okay.
So the minister was at pains to understand, oh, no, you can't, this doesn't apply to this. This will not apply. Oh, no, if it does, So these were very fundamental questions. So it's actually that it's only now some Ghanaians actually waking up to that E-Levy. I mean, they just thought that it was a tax that the government is passing. Government passes laws and taxes all the time. We don't have to do much about it. But now that other people are opposing it, I mean, civil society actors are making comments on it. It's coming back to Parliament again. Some people actually, if you listen to certain parliamentary leaders, they claim to have passed it already. So it's like we don't even have to do anything about it because the law has already been passed. Others say, no, it hasn't been passed. So that's the Parliament talking. So has the law been passed or has it been passed? if you depending on who you speak to, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
So even that mere confusion in Parliament, not to mention what stakeholders in Ghana. So I've told you about the stakeholder mapping.
Yeah.
So a Nigerian businessman in Ghana talking to his parent company in Nigeria, if they asked him, has the law been passed, what are we going to happen? He say, well, I'm not too sure because I heard one MP saying it has been passed. I'm also hearing others saying it has not been passed. There's communication issues I'm talking about.
Sure.
Okay, so and if you translate that across the gamut of stakeholders, where it's either been passed or not, do traders know it has been passed? What does Guta say? What do the telecom operators say? What about the telecom smart card? You know, there are all kinds of stakeholders in the telecom sector. And if there is confusion, even in that group, for a communication professional, it doesn't look good from my perspective if you want to push an agenda where people are confused. You want as much agreement with whatever you want to do as possible. And if there's sufficient disagreement to cause sufficient disruption to whatever social order, it is not ideal. It's not an ideal time. That's why Rawlings had no choice. I mean, military, if you some say dictator, well, but he had to listen to what was going on. And unless you want to run through people and mow them down and in demonstrations and kill them and all that, it's just not feasible.
We should be a bit more flexible, you know, to hold it and then do
that's why I'm saying that when I was chairman of the Public Education Committee for the reintroduction of the value-added tax, we did exactly this for 18 months.
So what
I'm not saying this one would. No, I've not assessed it.
Well, what I want to understand from you,
it will be 3 months, maybe 4 months. I can't tell you.
They should put it on hold for now and continue with the town meeting for a while. I mean, Ghanaians should really appreciate it.
I would say so, that because there are many dimensions of this thing. First of all, even if it's coming back, should it come back at 1.75?
Yes.
Or should it come back at some other lower figure?
But what do you think?
Well, again, I can only recite my experience. When the value-added tax was coming back, first it had been proposed by Professor Dr. Boche's administration as finance minister as 17.5%. After 18 months of public education, we agreed that a lower tax would be more acceptable to Ghanaians. So we brought it back at 10%.
10%, yeah.
So that is history of Ghana, which every secondary school student should be learning, and which all of us don't really need to state too much. But for the younger people, some of whom may demonstrate or go out and make some noises, it's good to keep some of that history alive because it's based on our own experiences. We shouldn't be repeating mistakes which are avoidable if we can. So this is the history of Ghana we're talking about. The economic history of Ghana.
I think the government is looking at, looking at the markets now. Going to the international market is a bit more expensive now.
Very true.
We always talk about raising internal revenue.
Very true.
And if we need cash, we still there wouldn't be any much time to do this. So while the stakeholder engagements go on, this thing can be passed and then.
Well, I'm not in the government to suggest the strategy that can be adopted, but I noted, for example, that a certain, institution which studies Ghanaian economy has put out articles about how much our natural resource revenues are bringing us as a country, and determined that Ghana gets only about 17% of its oil and gas revenues, whereas Nigeria and Botswana get 55 and 60%. And that institution is the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
Yeah.
So you can check with them if you want to get those articles and details. And so they felt, their opinion is that simply the negotiation by Ghana over some of the agreements we sign with our foreign partners may be where some of that resources that have been locked up and locked out, which are not available to us, may reside. Now, I haven't quantified what that may bring to the table in terms of revenue, but I'm saying there are pockets of revenues which people talk about and debate regularly in Ghana. So this E-Levy wasn't there last year. It's only now that it's being talked about. So it's a new idea. It may have been talked about before, but it's now coming into reality and people are debating its merits. There may be numerous other items which the Ministry of Finance obviously would have been looking at periodically. But in tax policy implementation, it is quite obvious that often governments as a whole, not necessarily Ghana government, governments as a whole often look for a tax that they feel is easy to either to mobilize or easy to account for and maybe easy to pay. Not necessarily whether it is painful to pay or not painful to pay, but easy to pay. The payability is a factor.
Yeah.
So they may tend to look in that direction rather than in the direction of sending things that may be more longer term, that may take more time, that may be less easy to pay or less easy to identify, and let those other potential tax revenues slide. But without being in government, I'm just saying that there's a time when all of us as Ghanaians must look to all possibilities. For example, in this radio interview I'm talking about, one or some of the callers in were concerned that why have we let the road levy or road tax that we are driving free through the road tolls. Why couldn't that have stayed until when this new tax is coming to replace it? So maybe we've lost 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever period of time the roads have been empty or have been free. And even if those aren't generating amounts in the size of the E-Levy, at least those contributing something. And now that you've given it free, if you're going to bring it back again, that's another public communication challenge. Because you then have to explain to people why it became free and why it is now coming back. Okay? So these are technical issues that communication professionals have to grapple with.
You've been in a communications minister, so you know how these players in the industry play. What is your perception about this E-Levy thing?
No, my perception is that communication as a growing sector of the economy is one that is always attractive to tax authorities.
Yeah.
I mean, they see the sector growing, people are making money, revenues are coming in. So they say, well, we should also get our share of it. So I agree that in principle, any government, every government should try and get their fair share of that sector. But how do you do it? And my own experience is that if you even ask the telecom operators themselves, we need 6 billion from this, your sector. Please tell us how best we can do it in such a manner that you'll be comfortable with it and, you know, your consumers will also be comfortable with it. I'm absolutely certain that they can give you a nice paper on that subject. So I don't know the extent to which government is interacting or not interacting with them. We hear of digitalization and so forth. But I am certain, because I'll give you another example. When I became minister for a short period in the Ministry of Mines and Energy, I had dinner with 2 Australian businessmen. And in the dinner, I was asking them about how they saw the Ghanaian, you know, gold mining sector, investment sector. And they said, but one of the things they don't understand is that why are we asking them, the Australians, to keep as much as, I think, 70% of their revenues offshore and to use it to buy their, you know, supplies and raw materials and what have you. And I said, well, okay. So I said, if that is the current policy of the government, because I had not been there long enough to even know this fact. I said, so how much would they think would be a fair percentage? Well, they said, 25 or 30% should be okay. They, the foreign investors, were telling us that our laws were too loose and too lax. And they would have been happy to pay 25 or 30%, which may be prevailing in other countries. So the good thing about international organizations where I worked, African Development Bank, United Nations, World Bank, etc., is that they have global data and averages and statistics. And of course, now that Google is available for everybody, you can just Google any subject you want and say, average tax levy of telecom tax in the world. They'll give you a whole map. And you can see where the averages are and determine whether your levy is above or below the global average, assuming you want to use a global. Then African average. African telecom companies, sector, regulators, whatever. What is the average this? What is the mean? All those types of information are available. So that you don't go way beyond any amount that seems to be the prevailing element. And I told you already that IFS has told us, all Ghanaians, that at least in the case of gold mining or natural resource extraction, especially oil related, that we seem to be much lower in terms of our revenue mobilization than some comparator countries. So in terms of where we can get our resources to balance our budget, there are numerous options.
Supposing you were the president and your finance minister tabled this, and all these things have come up.
Sure.
What advice would you have given him?
To the president himself? No,
you being the president and your finance minister has gone through this. He's tabled something that will bring revenue to help with your agenda.
You're asking me an impossible question. Why? Because the president himself, if things are working normally, is the chairman of the cabinet meetings at which the decisions you're talking about were taken. So he cannot be ignorant of the decisions and whether he actually supported them or they don't support them. Well, actually,
but the point, at the point, he should be able to make a declaration that, okay, let's suspend it.
It's not possible for the president to have been at a meeting where he opposed something and the thing is happening. It's just not possible by Ghana's governance structure. Because the president actually, the cabinet is only an advisory body to the president. The president doesn't have to accept even anything, 10% of anything that goes on in the cabinet. He can ignore it. And in fact, presidents have executive power. So they can just sign and approve almost anything by executive authority without any cabinet meeting. But when it comes to parliament, then you have a certain debate of one kind or the other, and then you may decide one thing or the other. But I'm saying that if your point is that should a president, not necessarily this president, because I don't want to, again, personalize it too much.
Yes, sure.
Should any president, when they see sufficient mobilization against any policy which may make it difficult to implement, because it's one thing to just pass the policy, it's another thing to implement it. And even your own researchers have told you that if we pass this policy, we can tell already, before the policy has been passed, that as many as 24% of the people will try to avoid paying it and will go into cash economy. You're trying to be a digital economy. You're trying to become as cashless as possible. These people retrogress. It's like, patients in the hospital who, relapse. They are not willing to take their medicine anymore. And this, as I'm saying to you, also comes at a very difficult time for the economy as a whole, when your investment community, your rating community, your other international bank rulers are giving you signals that we are having difficulty supporting your economy. So all of that will come to any meeting, that's a cabinet meeting, even a bilateral meeting between a minister and a president. And if they look at the numbers closely, then they will guide themselves. But the challenge for this government, just to talk the Ghana specifically, the fact that the budget has a hole, a big hole, which if you take the E-Levy out would be about, I think, 6-point-something billion, which the government hopes to get from the E-Levy alone.
Alone, yes.
Okay, so unless you are talking to government officials and you discuss with them what are some of the alternative measures that they could adopt that could add up to the 6 billion, which may not come from the E-Levy. Or let's assume that you also modulate and moderate your demands. And so like NDC did in 1995 or 1998, you drop the VAT, as I said, from 17.5% to 10%, just for it to get through So they have all those options about percentages to play with.
But do you think
and
the
other sources of funding.
High? Do you think the 1.75
it's not for me to say. It's not for me to say.
From what you are seeing, I'm sure you've
I would have
following.
No, I haven't done that. I haven't done that analysis. But I told you that anybody who wants to do that analysis can go on a computer today and get average, tax rates in Africa, tax rates in general, then average telecom-related tax rates, then electronic communication tax rates. I mean, you can get all kinds of information, and that will tell you whether you are somewhere in the middle, below, above any quartile. Then that's, I think, will be one of the indicators to tell you whether what you are proposing is reasonable or not. And I haven't done that analysis, so I can't speak to that. I can tell you how to get that information, which I think the government ought to be able to get easily.
But do you see it as a threat from what is happening now? That, if it is finally passed,
Well, I'm concerned about the threat of social disorder. And I announced that concern as far back as January last year. And this is what I'm saying, that in your book, in your paper, in the Daily Graphic, I shared publicly what some of those concerns were. I did not foresee a fight in Parliament amongst educated representatives, well-dressed, well-clothed, people who had eaten well that day, who are going to go back to nice homes, very fancy cars, most of them are in four-wheel drives. So if you think from a psychological point of view that if, for whatever reason, Parliament could sink that low, at least on that one day, for which all their leaders have apologized in one form or the other already, to the point that they've had to apologize for that one day's activity. And I'm telling you the profile of the average parliamentarian. What do you think the people who are in the streets selling dog chains and other, getting 5 cedis, 10 cedis income a day are going to do if they also have a chance to express their views? We are not in a good place. And the cost of living is becoming challenging, horrendous for most of us. I mean, I employ quite a number of people, and they're all complaining. It's now payday, or this week is pay time. And, you hear a lot of concerns. People want salary increases. But how are people companies that themselves are squeezed? And now the challenge is that because of this tax, that people don't know whether to be passed or will not be passed, and at what rate it will be passed, most companies cannot take long-term decisions. So if I was at the Ministry of Trade, I would have noticed that immediately, that companies are unable or unwilling to take long-term decisions because they just don't know where the economy is going. They've seen Fitch reports, they've seen that, and a national discussion and debate is about to take place next week. And all that makes investors very unsettled. And money is fungible. It doesn't stay around just because it's there. It can be moved tomorrow to another safe haven. So there's those who may ask their money to come out, and let us see what happens in Ghana, and then we can come back in. And even just 2 or 3% of that alone can ruffle markets.
Doc, you are a very influential person.
You speak.
Yeah, from your experience, you speak. People listen.
I could be influential.
You speak. People listen. People listen. People from
I'm not sure about
political divides listen. Maybe they may not act immediately or tell you what you said was good. From the inference I draw from all the explanations that you've given is that the right thing to do is to at least first allow cool heads to prevail in Parliament.
Very good. Yes.
2, a lot more communication should go on for the people who want to tax to understand it.
Excellent.
The third one should be at least government withdraw it, allow these engagements to go on, and then reintroduce it. Maybe at a lower rate like you did with the VAT, so that at the end of the day, people would appreciate it and then, contribute. Is that what I think
that's a good summary.
Okay, sir.
You've taken the words out of my mouth because I've tried not to pronounce them as a prescription per se.
Yes.
You see, I've discussed the issues
broadly
and left it more or less to your imagination or to the imagination of the listeners. But
I'm
here
ha-
you
I'm
are.
happy. I'm happy I got
You
it.
are a good listener. So you've summarized it.
Yes. Finally, Doc, if you look around West Africa, we're having coups all over.
That's another dimension of it.
Yes.
Altogether.
Yes. So and I just want to pick your thoughts on just
So
on
you
what
know,
you
when
think
you
the
add that
developments
subject,
are.
when you add that dimension to it, and I didn't want to go there at all, but I'm sure security analysts, those who pride themselves that I'm a security analyst, will have their papers and their documents and their commentaries on this. We want to believe that Ghana is beyond coups. Not only because, well, the person who was considered for a long time as a master coup maker has passed away only last year. But because it has demonstrated that it doesn't necessarily cure the problems of the country. I think that's the main reason why coups are not likely to come back into Ghana. That most elements of society, including the military, have reached a conclusion that it doesn't really, it may serve short-term personal or group interests, but long-term, it often draws the country back or slows down our development. But French-speaking African countries have some peculiar problems, which those of us who have studied history or political science are aware from the days of Sékou Touré, who rejected the French domination of his country and opted to go alone. If the French say, unless you do this, you do that, we pull our sockets, electrical gadgets from your country and leave it in darkness and go back to France. And it was on that occasion that these young people need to know. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana gave Guinea 10 million pounds, which in today's currency valuation may be in the region of $100 million. It was a good amount of money for a newly born country to have something to pay bills and to start the economy. That was the kind of Pan-Africanism and intra-state relationships that that Nkrumah tried to introduce. And of course, beyond that, we then went into a Ghana, Mali, Guinea union. Ghana, Mali, and Guinea formally signed an agreement to become one country. Most Ghanaians don't seem to remember that. And so Ghana, Mali, and Guinea, even though they are not contiguous, we don't share a common border with Mali, but Guinea and Mali share a common border. They agreed, and they were French-speaking countries. We are English-speaking, so there are no obvious commonalities. But they agreed that let's try this union. Let's start with 3 of us, and if maybe the others will join, then they join. But then the French, in particular, have always been opposed to any of those kinds of unions, and that's why the French-speaking countries are the ones that are rebelling now. The part I have a challenge with is the problems with ECOWAS. If, again, those articles are true as to whether they want to suspend their relationship with ECOWAS just so that the bite of the ECOWAS sanctions will not take effect in their countries. I'm not sure how they want to manage their economies internationally, World Bank, IMF. It's going to be difficult and very messy for them. But unfortunately, military coupists have to take some time to learn what most civilians know. Because unfortunately, they don't come from schools of management, schools of economics, schools of this or schools of that, even though they may have been taught some of these in military academies. But if they surround themselves with solid, strong personalities, as Rawlings did, one of the strengths of President Rawlings was he consciously sought out a lot of people who were not military at all, who may not even have agreed with him initially, and found a way to bring them into his government. That's why President Kufuor joined President Rawlings initially in 1982 as a member of the PNDC before he left. And others also came on board, left, and so forth. So I hope we see have more peace.
ECOWAS, English-speaking, French-speaking. What do you think should be maybe just 30 seconds, what do you think should be the role of ECOWAS in trying to curb these coups within the sub-region?
Well, I think it will depend on what the coup makers have itemized as their claims for overthrowing the civilian governments. I think in the case of Guinea, all of us, or most people seem to have been aware that Alpha Condé, who had been elected civilian leader, seemed to have gone back on his word and tried to, well, actually went for a third term, which obviously was probably a deal breaker with the society, because as a government or as a party, you tend to get into a social contract with your electorate by the kind of promises you make to them. And so if he made a promise that at the time he was being sworn in the first time, that he will abide by the Guinean government, Guinean constitution, I swear this, I swear that, all these oaths that people take. And if you swore those oaths and then suddenly you're not abiding by them, people will feel like, well, then let's take the law into our hands because you yourself are not obeying the law. The issues with Mali and Burkina Faso are probably much more different because the Malians have had this Tuareg rebellion in the north, and then the Burkina Faso aspect also has its an aspect of that in terms of the northern sector being Sahelian and Tuaregs being there. It is very fluid. But my friend Jean-Claude Brou, who is the president of the Ekwow Commission, with whom I worked at the World Bank, he's a very level-headed man. But obviously, when heads of states meet, they also meet as a certain kind of club. So heads of state also tend to think a certain way. And noticeably, there's at least one head of state amongst them in the West African region who is also doing an extension of his term. I'm sure you know who. So if we also seem to be breaking the rules of our own organizations, it doesn't make it easy for others, whether military or civilian, to also accept our legitimacy. So we are hoping that that will be the last one in the West African region, because unfortunately for Ghana, you see, we can't say that we are in a sea of instability, but we are the only stable country, or one of the few stable countries, and be enjoying that. No. There's what is called the neighborhood effect in economics. Neighborhood. You are just in the wrong neighborhood. So if you're living in East Cantonments or Airport Residential area, you have a certain neighborhood effect. The roads may be better, the water may run, you know, the stealing and thefts may be on the lower side. If you are in Sukura or Nima or some other lower income area, you have other turbulence that you have to live with. You know, so the neighborhood effect also affects countries. Countries that are in Southeast Asia, we're very, very lucky that one or two of the countries moved, and then the whole Southeast Asian economies went along with them. The neighborhood effect worked in Southeast Asia, and it also works against us in West Africa. So that when you think you are in an island of peace in Ghana, but if your neighbors are struggling, the foreign investors who are putting money into the various countries then have to struggle because they don't know the difference between Ghana, Gambia, Guinea. They all sound alike. If you're in Canada or you're in Australia, even for those of us who traveled around, they say, oh, you're from Ghana, huh? Okay. How are the baobab trees there? How's the desert working with you? They have no idea. You know, so neighborhood effect doesn't work for us in West Africa if other West African countries are just not stable. East African countries, fortunately, have been fairly more stable since the Uganda, Amin era. Now their head of state there is doing 30-something years in office and so forth. So, and of course, Southern Africa has its own peculiarity in post-apartheid South Africa, where they still have very serious problems with HIV/AIDS and now the pandemic and power outages and unemployment levels and so forth. So Africa is an interesting continent, and my job, coming back to my original introduction as the Africa Regional President for Ekwow CAPEX, Ekwow Capacity Exchange, is to understand what is happening in all those regions and to advise my colleagues, including my senior colleagues, on the right things to do. So if I'm talking about Ghana, it's not just a personal issue, it's for all of us Ghanaians and for other Africans who also think very highly of Ghana. Anything that goes wrong in Ghana is highly of great concern. Even soccer, if we get beaten by Comoros, it's like, wow, I mean, is it the Ghana that we know or we knew? What is happening in the country? So we all have to collectively, irrespective of political affiliations and petty disagreements and jealousies, this is the time Ghanaians must hold their hands in unity and unison to lift up the nation in whatever we can. But fortunately, unfortunately, we have leaders also who we have elected, and therefore we leave them the room to take the appropriate decisions. But the truth now is that if the appropriate decisions are not taken, then you find that there will be a kind of a backlash. However that backlash takes place, we are yet to see.
Thank you very much for appearing on our show, Big Interview. We appreciate your thoughts and we hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.